Welcome. I'm Dr. Joseph Randolph Bowers, and I'm happy to present this book that we've recently published with St. Clair Cottage Press, Clay Art Therapy and Spirituality. From the preface of the book. As we complete this project, we see for the first time part of the deeper significance of the themes that weave together the mystery of clay work as therapeutic and life-giving. This effused dimension of our existence that we sought to explore and to convey takes a great deal of time to percolate, much like the extended time from digging up raw clay to the final crystalline production. Coming to terms with the meaning of clay work can take even longer and can expend even more personal resources toward the goal of articulation. The early days of this project were difficult. Our title changed often and morphed into the current draft. The existing title made intuitive sense, but we did not understand how it might come together. The creative process of writing parallels the art studio and clay experience, just as these parallel the personal awakening and meaning-making processes of therapy, spirituality, and science. The project appears like facets of a diamond, rough cut, with many refractive colors and jagged lines. Each chapter of this book combines many elements and gives the reader rich soils and clays from which to plant a garden or weave a new mystery in form and function. The project of co-creating clay work as therapy looks like a primordial celestial body more than a well-cut and finished stone that could be placed into a setting. Each step along the journey of co-creation is an entryway into more vistas. As these visions of the self come to overlap and interact, the visual spectrum shifts and expands. A diamond is obviously transparent, but in this context the metaphor is somewhat strange. This project is about clay and art therapies. These mediums are hardly see-through, nor are theology, spirituality, eremitic practice, disability experience, and minority life naturally transparent. In fact, all of these realities appear rather mysterious, simply because each and all take time to understand and to live, with long enough to overcome prejudice and bias, and to crack open the gates of perception. This is what we call deep, abiding learning. When we take some insight into our being, we are forever changed into a new being. As we continue this journey, being itself can be transcended into non-being. This is to say, non-being is a form of true joy that is only found really within the state of existential detachment and a humility in freedom. Freedom from the ideas of the self that tend to bind us to this reality in unhealthy ways. This is a deeply childlike state of being, which at one level is quite natural and at another level tends to be either a profound gift or a state of development that is long in coming to fruition after many years of growth and change. Clay work is part and parcel of all of these moments along the path of awakening. The therapeutic element is the change process itself, and the insight and opening of capacity for insight is the therapy of self-creation, which at best is co-creational within relationships where we often need a hand up. You get a sense from these descriptions that this project is about the hidden nature of clay work as therapeutic. What is unseen is what we attempt to convey in this book. This is why a project like this takes many years to emerge. We're left with the impression that seeing is not so much about believing, because sensing and feeling are more kin with the mysticism of deep knowing. As we rethink the title, we feel intuitively that clay and art therapies are a passageway into spirituality as a way of personal meaning making. Certainly, cultural and spiritual meanings inform studio clay work and art therapy, and naturally, therapeutic theory holds a place of its own. However, we would say that theory in this particular realm of practice needs to be even more embodied than in any other form of therapy. This is best practiced in experiential methods. This shared and mutual need for experiential practices that arise in clay therapy is based on the simple truth that what we know in clay work, we must feel with our hands. We must sense clay and clay work first and foremost within the 5 organs of our kinesthetic touch, our discerning sight, curious listening, our unique, careful, and safe aromas, and our equally meaningful and familiar sounds. The 5 base senses are the gateway to co-creation of meaning. Meaning emerges over time that is spent within clay work. This can be immediate, actually, and is more often elongated. Richness and depth of meaning appears to grow over time. Within each of us are a multifaceted self that interacts within clay work as a form of psychosynthesis through which we journey toward fuller disintegration and reintegration. Attending to the parts of self makes for deep abiding person-centered practice within psychotherapy. The more attentive we are to the unique characteristics of the self, the more we may gracefully attend to potential growth areas and the vistas within the vision of the diamond. We often gaze at a crystal ball simply because of its beauty. This particular ball sits in a central room where we live and work. The practice also humbles the mind. We can never see through the ball with clarity. The point of the gazing is to enlighten the heart-mind or the soul to some alternative perception of reality that can open up new insight. Therapy is a similar process. Certainly in the clay studio, we feel this when we meditate on the clay, when we're centering on the wheel, as well as when we meditate on a piece of art that has been created. Falling in love also awakens the same effuse dynamic that stops the cognitive mind from grasping logical conclusions. Clay work can be entirely functional, of course, but when clay work is therapeutic, it becomes something akin to gazing upon the self as an energetic orb or pool of reflection. Like the medieval mirror, the concave surface of the self is refracted via the diaphanous colors of twilight. A mysterious moment is allowed, perhaps even nurtured, as the feminine quality of clay work embraces the birthing of possibility and meaning. In a similar way, we reflect in this project how the experiences of living a solitary, eremitic life, a sense of Franciscan spirituality, and a pathway of minority existence in society are portals into clay work, as well as an active form of an incarnate pathway of life, provided for the journey of the soul into God. In this way, this project practices an integral and holistic science of interiority within a transpersonal psychology that is deeply ecological, social, and regenerative. A word to the wordless nature of theology and science. As an intuitive empath, we often see and feel connections that are difficult to articulate in clear language. It is as if the nature of reality is obscured from the cognitive mind that seeks to understand and explain what is happening. We often revert to metaphors, stories, and allegories. At certain times we can see what is happening in the body, physically and emotionally, neurologically and systematically. But finding the language to articulate and convey this is not always easy, and takes years of study and practice. In our clinical work, we use intuitive sight to help create accurate and person-centered plans, solutions, and interventions. We see through professional psychotherapy practice that there are many ways to integrate these skills into daily life and into helping others. There are layers in which Western science and fields like transpersonal psychology have progressed to enable acknowledgement of much more territory than was acceptable and discernible in the past generations. Today there is more openness to the numinous, and the edges of what is explainable have been continually pushed further into what used to be entirely mysterious. This is no doubt a brilliant result for science and applied knowledge. However, there are many who suggest we need to rekindle a sense of mystery and awe toward a cosmology that is dominated by flatland materialism, leading to a sense of disconnection from the material world and social alienation. We admit that while we have worked hard over the years and in this reflective analysis to provide clear as possible descriptions, there are many turns in the sacred circle of life where we rely on a poetic vision. In many cases, the poetry of feeling, sensation, intuition, transpersonal and psychic insight provides one available language to express the deeper meanings of existence. During our master's project, we called this approach ontopoetics, because we found a bridge existed between the language of poetry and ontology, faith and science. This bridge provided a linkage and a pathwork where the body felt it was vital to respect, uphold, and to learn new, respectful ways of practice. We saw this language actively deployed during medieval times to explain the emerging theories of nature in the physical world. This language was used actively in the Franciscan intellectual tradition and in lesser ways within the academy and sciences up to the Enlightenment. We have found that this approach was used in the work of many distinguished Western theorists and scientists. There is little doubt, historically and practically speaking, why the Western professions rely so heavily on cognitive functionality and empirical materialist description. These are among the only domains that are clearly and bluntly observable, even if they are a narrow bandwidth of the reality that can be discerned by other means. The processes of induction and deduction rely on increasing inferences that build one upon the other, leading to bodies of theory that must rely on belief and faith that the prior assumptions made were correct. As science advances, the current generation tends to rely solely on faith that the past work was valid and true. This is sometimes not the case, as happens when a whole body of theory collapses, due to it being proven that prior assumptions were false. The point being that the actual structure and function of faith within developmental and linguistic processes is not foreign to science. Not at all. Faith is indeed integral to science. Science is also quite integral to faith. The latter point is much harder pill to swallow amongst those in the religious camp who think they know it all. In a project like this, we are afforded a very rare opportunity. We are not bound by the constraints of either camp, nor do we have to comply with the dearly held dogmatic principles and rules of science or religion. The orthodox canon is an impossible nut to crack. It hardly seems to matter whether the canon is epistemological and scientific or theological and religious. In either camp, staunch beliefs and bias or prejudice function in the same ways. This project provides a summary and integration of many sources of knowledge and understanding and brings together a life's work toward a hopeful conclusion. To be hopeful means to stand outside the boxes built by existing systems of knowledge. It is for these reasons that this project is placed within an emphasis on the disciplines of spirituality, liberal theology, psychotherapy, and sociology. Social and political values have guided our work across the fields of practice represented here. For many reasons, we have sided with liberal democratic values. Not the least of inspirations for this direction is Franciscan heritage and minority living that encourages and nurtures identification with the marginalized of society and religion. The spirituality of stones is important to reflect on in this context. This teaching appears in the Gospels and arises when Francis of Assisi heard the voice of Jesus from the cross of San Damiano. "Francis, can't you see my house is falling into ruin? Repair my house." Francis began to use the stones to repair the chapel and started begging for stones to build the house of God. Only later did he realize that the spirit of evolution was telling him to build with living stones. When humanity grows to a more mature place and learns to live in peace and harmony with each other, then society, creativity, and commerce tend to flourish. Culture blossoms in these conditions. This is the kind of social experiment that is dearly needed in today's world. Standing apart from the dominant ethos means to chart a path less trodden. There is a third option, an alternative approach. We are proof this reality is possible. This work is ecological and panentheistic. We deliberately seek to rekindle a sense of the numinous as central to the human kinship with creation. We present an evolutionary Christology that posits a macro-historical and transcendent theory of time-space unfolding within what is vicariously called the ongoing Christogenesis of the cosmos. Within this framework, humanity and the clay of Mother Earth represents creation's reach toward the stars, and our collective and individual ladder toward self-transcendence. As the creation becomes aware of itself and of its history and temporal nature, the expansion of reintegration of levels of development are quite expansive and demonstrate the organic nature of intelligence as a future-leaning potential. To extend this metaphorical allegory, clay in the potter's hands is certainly organic and sentient. We do not think of clay as having spirit and animation, but we are looking through the flatland vision of Western materialism. When we stop the Cartesian prejudice in its tracks, and we gaze at the crystal ball of true reality emerging, we begin to realize that even clay and stones are in fact alive and dancing. Energy is always moving, even in what appears to be solid and fixed. Relationships are always interacting, even within the particles of clay, and more especially when this clay body is on the wheel being reformed. Much like in biology and physics, it is acknowledged widely that the perception of the practitioner cannot be separated from what is being perceived. Both realities are contingent on each other and influence each other. In terms of therapy, claywork is a mirror that refracts the light of perception in a circular and triangular pattern, giving rise to spiral learning, changes in behavior, and at best the emergence of new forms and levels of consciousness. We can reconcile these frames within the biblical traditions because we see the biblical writings at two distinct levels. One is the historical and contingent that acknowledges both the historical context of the writing as well as the cultural, linguistic, value-laden, and limited perspectives of the writers. The second level is the metaphorical and poetic nature of the biblical traditions as a whole. For example, where the Ten Commandments state we are to have no other gods before us, we suggest that the panentheistic stance takes in a vastly superior functional capacity, mental and emotional scope, and a more realistic and ecologically relevant frame of reference. In so doing, the commandment is entirely honored, where all the metaphorical gods and goddesses are understood within the unitary, synergetic, and integral vision and practice of evolutionary science. One transcends the fundamentalist and regionalism of religious traditions and sacrifices certain affiliations to gain a much more accurate and truthful reflection of reality, as this is emerging in the history of the disciplines of science and spirituality. The mythic literal is transcended by the symbolic practical and empirical. Our method is interreligious in this sense, if not in practice trans-religious. The first term implies the integral method that seeks synergies and common ground between overt social and cultural beliefs and practices. The second term denotes a more intentional practice of integration through intuitive, emotive, psychic, and spiritual level consciousness practice that manifests new expressions of spirituality in daily life. These methods move beyond the seminal work of people like Thomas Merton, who worked primarily in the former domain of interreligious dialogue. Merton was viewed as dangerous politically precisely because his mystical and eremitic experience was leading him to articulate radical departures and overt critiques of the Western canon. We have taken Merton's project to its logical ends. This project seeks an integral harmonic resonance with many traditions by drawing in sources that are Eastern, Western, Southern, Northern, and pre-modern, as well as pre-Christian. We posit that the emerging praxis produces results more in tune with evolutionary cosmology and lead toward a global ethic of care and co-responsibility that sits and stands and walks in kinship with creation. Words like Christ and Christocentric are used creatively within this philosophic intention. The word omega is useful as proposed by Ilia Delio. She says that omega means the end or summation of or total outcome. In this sense, Christ takes on these meanings. Christ is the omega point and spirit of evolution's end, and the outcomes in the far distant future, as well as the alpha or the beginning of creation's first processes and the unfolding many billions of years ago. While it may make complete sense to forego the word Christ, in a sense due to its biases and historical prejudices, we prefer to keep the word for other reasons. We see that the word Christ is not so much for Christianity as a religion, but the word is for humanity and all of creation as a philosophy of evolutionary science. To stretch our perception to this end takes a great deal of work for many people. Whether you are an agnostic or atheist or a traditional Orthodox Christian, over many years we've seen how the pathwork toward these awakenings detaches people from their ossified traditions that are almost set in stone, and allows new and creative insights and solutions to enduring problems. We must acknowledge that the word Christ is political, of course, limited, and quite biased by the attitudes of those who use the word in myopic ways, whether with intention or without conscious awareness. The exercise of coming to terms with the terms of engagement is an ongoing process. This project emerges from 30 plus years of study and work in the sacred politic of minority health, with about 20 years in the academy teaching in psychotherapy, education, and indigenous studies disciplines. In a way, the project draws together in synthesis many strands of experience and critical as well as contemplative reflection. By sacred politic, we convey actions that are sensible and judicious in the circumstances and with a more complex sense of purpose than social and political outcomes. Over the years, we have participated in the natural ethos of our era without necessarily having conscious awareness of the scope and implications of these social, historical, ecological, and global layers of evolution. This being the case, over time we have awakened through many hardships and trials within the chrysalis of the Western cultural and spiritual desert. This project articulates some layers of this awakened consciousness within the participatory nature of cosmogenesis. These realities are not simply and exclusively Christian. In some sense, this karmic evolutionary project we call human life shares more kinship with the secular sciences than with the world religions, precisely because, as Ken Wilber put it, religion remains entrenched in the mythic literal stage of development and has become closed in on itself, reactive and fundamentalist. The world religions have not transcended their own limitations and are without the insights gained from the life in the higher levels of consciousness. From the latter perspective, we know that the ascension of reason necessitates the inevitability of science, and that religion takes on a new meaning and purpose. The new religion functions within an ecology of ungraspingness in unrestricted service to the common and authentically universal good. This is quite a far cry from the past and current ethos. Science also has by no means transcended flatland materialism and other compelling notions that lead to the dead end, to dead ends in both inquiry and epistemology. The long view sees the pathways of integral studies that lead to a global and functional convergence, where the world's religious traditions and the emerging sciences share partnerships of mutual benefit. Beyond that day, a new paradigm of meaning exists and is already being discerned and articulated. During these years, we have observed a distinctive trajectory toward integral studies in spirituality as a new and more vital arm of theology that parallels work being conducted in the geological, biological, and complex system sciences, including physics and quantum physics. From the sciences emerges a brand new story of creation that is ongoing and dynamic. The new cosmogenesis is forward-leaning and future-oriented inasmuch as the story places the present moment within an expansive eon and epoch within which we participate, observe, and articulate in theory and practice. These sacred secular narratives that science presents have been largely rejected by religions and have not been integrated into a revision of sacred theology and spirituality. How we imagine divinity and creation both need radical uprooting and transplantation into the new soils of integral and innovative studies. What appears to be the worship of false gods from the mythic literal worldview is perceived as integrative wisdom and entirely reasonable from the place of an applied, holistic scientific method. Our sociological observations over the past 4 decades reflect and critique what we continue to study and read across many fields, including in the science of minority health, psychotherapy, disability, and mental health specializations, as well as within spirituality, theology, transpersonal psychology, and cultural studies. The impulse toward integral studies appears to seek a sense of the whole, of convergences and correlations, which are necessarily components of problem-solving modalities natural to the purpose of inquiry and dialogue. Where the new sciences have been allowed and even nurtured by leading practitioners, the results are promising and suggest forward-leaning pathways that will come invariably to redefine both science and religion. These ends hold obvious utility and promise as a subject of inquiry at this level, and this cannot be denied. Likewise, no one could question the value of a study examining the nature of integral and consensus models in an era of extreme resistance to scientific wisdom and hard evidence in relation to climate change, sociological principles of peace and conflict resolution, and where robust evidence points to the necessary reforms of religion and secular frameworks. Yet, our purpose in the study is not only the means toward integral and holistic models, but the possible ends of these models. We experience the organic nature of clay and art therapy as embodiments of this human condition that is seeking the noble ends of transcendence into the nature of divinity and co-creation. In some ways, this is refreshing. Clay and art therapy is a direct means to the same transcendent end, of which our career has sought in so many variable ways. It is time to slow down the wheel of karma and center the self at the potter's wheel. Here we find a discipline and method in co-creation that moves the heart-mind in soulful directions. At the sacred center, we observe that the mysticism of minority spirituality is a pervasive dynamic of human agency that can be felt and seen through marginalization and trauma, as well as via healing and empowerment. We witness this transcendent pathwork across numerous social and historical contexts, including within clay and art therapy. We explore examples of this transformational and regenerative process that has come to define the core theme of this project. It is helpful to realize that our pragmatic sense of purpose comes from being a psychotherapist. We are really about facilitating useful change and healing in people's lives and circumstances. Clay and art therapy are central metaphors and actually are capacity-building processes in the co-construction of a personal, narrative-oriented meaning or spirituality. But pragmatism does not rely on creating meaning per se, as novel outcomes are quite clearly documented in the physiological, neurological, emotional, psychological, and interpersonal states that arise through clay therapy. Clay and art therapy provide a range of clearly supported benefits. What we are doing here is drawing together a map of reality that provides a comprehensive transpersonal field of practice into a holistic model. This organic sensibility might be viewed as a three-dimensional spectrum, from the base of practical physiological measures up to the heights of transcendent outcomes, with a middle birth that is expressive of relational interactions, interconnections, as registered by self-awareness and intersubjectivity. Clay and art therapy are native to all of these levels and dimensions. This is quite remarkable. We use the tools of emphasis on experiential mysticism to crack apart the husk of identity formation. In a sense, then, we are like the potter described by Isaiah the prophet in the quote that opens this book. The potter's form at the wheel is ruined and then reformed, the passage says. To revision the work of identity and minority epistemology requires the deconstruction of clay and form and the reforming of clay and identity and bodies into a new form. While at one level we're talking about clay and art in the studio process, at another level we convey the work of identity formation and reformation that is central to personal and social evolution. This is in part why the Franciscan tradition is useful in this context. The Franciscan ethos has contributed enormous strides to the historic and contemporary Western body of knowledge across the fields of science, art, and psychotherapy. Central to these contributions is the Franciscan Aromatic and minority experience that has helped to define notions of social cohesion, alienation, marginality, community, solitude, and experiential learning. Suffice to say, our personal and professional life pays a debt of homage to these traditions while using our experience of living as a contemporary urban hermit as a touchstone. The project speaks to a deep ecology of identity in creation. To use traditional Western knowledge and language, we offer an emphasis on ecclesiology that follows on decades of work in social political analysis and studies in spirituality. Ecclesiology is about our identity as a people, a collective of persons who are on a journey. Naturally, this identity in human community is framed within our partnership with the divine presence, the spirit of evolution. This relational sensibility in the West includes an emphasis on Christocentric reflective and socio-historical reworkings. Within these points of convergence, we hope to explore an emerging theory and practice of ceramic art therapy as a transformative process of healing and identity formation toward transcendent outcomes, using our professional and personal experiences as touchstones. This writing project uses a spiral learning approach that is based in part on developmental and experiential therapy methods, as well as the ancient traditions of mystical awakening. In these traditions, the combined synthesis of elements involves personal experience as the basis of gaining true and robust insight. However, personal insight must be balanced by well-formed presuppositions or values. These were once gained by close association with a master or adept who trained the acolyte in the ways of the force, so to speak. Today, the system of direct lineage is very rare because of the ready access of so-called knowledge in books and multimedia format. But as Francis of Assisi suggested once, knowledge is not for the faint of heart. Seek not so much knowledge, he suggested, and seek only the kingdom experientially. For only then, he suggested, these things will be added unto you. Francis and Clare of Assisi focused on direct engagement, experiential learning, and living in the presence of the divine advocate. This is a kind of claywork-based mystical re-education that is self-directed and person-centered. Science, likewise, relies on a partial experiential method called the hypothesis pathway. This is a way of testing theories by conducting experiments which are, in that sense, experiential and observationally based. Theories are built on past confirmed theories within science, and students of science cannot usually test these theories except through experiential methods. So, in this sense, the other side of scientific training and process toward insight is based in the knowledge of prior theories and the faith that these were indeed valid and can actually constitute a foundation for new and emerging insight. At the same time, the Western model of ecogenesis in knowledge and experimentation is quite fractured. In the not-so-distant past, we had schools and orders and churches oriented toward the training of practitioners within the holistic arts and sciences, who were also informed by the poetic systems of spirituality and theology. There are still deeply contemplative traditions alive within Western countries, but these have diminished greatly in number and they do not get much press. Naturally, they have always tended to rely on a gentle presence approach rather than evangelization and outreach. We must seek out contemplative traditions to gain access and learn about their ways of life. More so, to get into the inner circle of discipline and practice, you need usually to join or at least live among a contemplative community for a good amount of time. Most people today cannot or will not do this, and more than a few people do not see the value in this personal investment. In our lifetime, we have been blessed in many ways by having many years of learning within the traditions of Western mysticism, as well as the social sciences and psychology. Our liberal arts foundation in the academy happened at a historical juncture when the university had been made into a secular institution under the Canadian government. During that generation, the scholarly community retained their senior professors, who were steeped in the Western Christian tradition. They were not yet entirely secular, so they stood in the gap, so to speak. They formed a bridge between the rich traditional past and the present, an emerging paradigm. It has taken us since the 1980s to appreciate the inherent value and importance of their wisdom more fully. More so, over time, we have realized more about the pivotal nature of the historical situation that we entered during our undergraduate years. We were indeed at the forefront of a massive tectonic shift in values, beliefs, and experiential ways of life and learning. When it comes to this work at hand, we apply the new paradigm to the old themes of spirituality and values-based ways of making meaning. To accomplish this, we work with a spiral method in learning and human development that intentionally goes in concentric circles. The touchstone is the claywork sacred circle. Before each section of the book, we introduce claywork themes that we then explore through various interrelated and holistic themes. This generative co-creational method is steeped in the actual experiential method of spirituality itself. This narrative provides the reader with a parallel process that you can also engage in your own life and pathwork. You can, for example, engage in claywork or some other creative arts or similar interests. So we suggest take a pause. Yes, a deep breath to center the mind in the heart of the body, to still the cognitive process, to allow a moment of contemplative ease and co-creativity in gentle oneness with the whole of creation. Focus your eyes on one place, on a distant wall or object. Simply breathe. When you are ready, open your inner sight and awaken to the light within. See a small candle of illumination before your inner eye. Stay there with gentle focus for as long as you like. As you are ready, continue to read and enjoy the process of gentle awakening, as you are open and receptive to your own internal awareness. Allow the text of this book to dialogue with your own experience of life. Allow the words to be like sparks and fire within the kiln of your being. The book is written to awaken the self in ways that create possibility. Your role in this is central. Unlike most books, this book is more like a co-created, emerging gospel or a co-written song. The parts are meant to be taken in hand, to be lived and shared, and to change within your expressions and inspirations, and to raise many, many questions. The song is meant to be found in your own voice coming to life. These words on the page are a mirror to refract the clay of becoming renewed and reawakening and reawakened within your mind, heart, and soul. There is no better place to begin to explore a contemporary, regenerative, artistic spirituality than with Francis and Claire of Assisi. Francis was the patron of ecology, and Claire the patron of telecommunications. This therapeutic pathwork in clay and pottery is earth-based, integral, emergent, ecological, mystical, and steeped in love.